For decades, we've been sold a story about wealth. Wealth looks like luxury cars, designer brands, expensive watches, Instagram-worthy vacations. Wealth is visible. Wealth is status. Wealth is something you display. And if you work hard, if you earn a good income, you should reward yourself with these symbols of success. That's what we're told. That's what advertising teaches us. That's what social media reinforces constantly. But here's the paradox. The more you display wealth, the less of it you actually build. The more you spend on status signals, the less you have to invest. The more you look rich, the more likely you are to be broke. After managing money for nearly 50 years, after observing the financial behaviors of thousands of millionaires and analyzing what actually creates lasting wealth, I can tell you that stealth wealth, the deliberate choice to look ordinary while building extraordinary net worth, is one of the most powerful strategies in personal finance. And yet almost nobody talks about it. Today, that changes. I'm going to show you why the millionaires I know drive Toyotas, why status spending is the enemy of wealth accumulation, and how embracing stealth wealth could be worth 7 figures to you over your lifetime. Before we go further, I want to ask for your support. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on. It helps us continue creating this kind of in-depth financial education. You know, I've spent nearly 5 decades in the investment business. I've met with presidents and prime ministers. I've advised sovereign wealth funds managing hundreds of billions. I've sat across the table from some of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. And I can tell you something that might surprise you. The truly wealthy, the people with $10 million, $50 million, $100 million in net worth, they don't look like what you'd expect. They don't dress flashy. They don't drive Ferraris. They don't wear Rolexes covered in diamonds. They look ordinary, unremarkably ordinary. I remember one client meeting years ago. This was early in my career at BlackRock. We had a prospective client coming in, someone who'd been referred to us by another client. The referral said this person had substantial assets, wanted sophisticated portfolio management. I was expecting someone who looked the part. You know, expensive suit, luxury watch, that aura of wealth. The person who walked in was wearing khakis, a polo shirt, and sneakers. He looked like he was on his way to play golf at a public course. I almost didn't take him seriously. That was a mistake. Turned out this unassuming man in khakis had a net worth north of $200 million. He'd built a manufacturing business over 40 years, sold it, invested conservatively, lived modestly. His car? A 10-year-old Honda Accord. His house? A comfortable but not ostentatious home in a nice but not exclusive neighborhood. His watch? A $50 Casio. And his wealth? Completely invisible to anyone who didn't know him well. This encounter changed how I thought about wealth. Because here's what I realized. The correlation between visible consumption and actual net worth is weak at best, and often negative. The people who look the richest often aren't. And the people who are the richest often don't look it. There's a fundamental disconnect between wealth signaling and wealth building. And understanding this disconnect is one of the most important insights in personal finance. Let me explain what I mean by status spending, because I think we need to be precise about this. Status spending is purchasing things primarily to signal your economic position to others. It's buying the luxury car not because you love driving or because it's more reliable, but because you want people to see you in that car and think you're successful. It's wearing the designer logo not because the quality is superior, but because you want people to recognize the brand and perceive you as affluent. It's taking the expensive vacation and posting about it on social media not because you enjoyed the experience more than a cheaper alternative, but because you want the validation and the envy. Status spending is consumption driven by external motivation. By what other people think. By social comparison. By the desire for recognition and respect through material display. And it's absolutely rampant in our culture. We are drowning in status spending. Every luxury brand ad is selling status. Every influencer posting from a 5-star resort is signaling status. Every person driving a BMW or wearing a Gucci bag or carrying the latest iPhone on launch day is, to some degree, engaging in status consumption. Now, I'm not saying there's never a legitimate reason to buy premium products. Quality matters. Performance matters. If you genuinely love cars and you buy a high-performance vehicle because it brings you joy when you drive it, that's different. If you buy durable, well-made products that last longer and provide better functionality, that can actually be economical. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the specific phenomenon of buying things primarily because of what they signal about you to other people. And here's the problem with status spending. It's a wealth destruction mechanism. Every dollar you spend on status is a dollar you don't invest. Every dollar that goes toward the logo, the brand, the signal, is a dollar that doesn't compound. And over time, over decades, the cumulative effect is staggering. Let me give you some numbers. Take cars, which are one of the most common forms of status spending. The average new car price in the United States right now is about $48,000. But that's average. Luxury cars, the ones people buy for status, run $60,000, $80,000, $100,000, sometimes much more. And cars depreciate fast. A new car loses about 20% of its value the moment you drive it off the lot. It loses another 10% to 15% each year for the first few years. So that $80,000 luxury car is worth $64,000 after one day, $54,000 after 1 year, $46,000 after 2 years. Now contrast that with someone who buys a reliable used car. A 3-year-old Honda Accord or Toyota Camry in good condition costs about $22,000. It's past the steepest part of the depreciation curve. It's reliable. It'll last another 10 years easily with basic maintenance. And here's the key. The person who buys the used Honda instead of the new luxury car has $58,000 that they don't spend. $58,000. If they invest that money and it grows at 7% annually, which is a reasonable long-term stock market return, after 30 years that $58,000 becomes $442,000. Nearly $500,000 from one car purchase decision. But wait, it gets worse for the status spender. Because they don't just buy one luxury car. They replace it every few years to maintain the status signal. Every 5 years, they're dropping $80,000 on a new car. Over 30 years, that's 6 cars, $480,000 in total spending. Meanwhile, the modest car buyer replaces their $22,000 used car every 10 years, spending $66,000 total over 30 years. The difference is $414,000 in nominal spending. And when you account for the investment returns on the difference, the cumulative wealth gap is over $1 million. $1 million. From car choices alone. This is what I mean when I say status spending destroys wealth. It's not just the immediate cost. It's the opportunity cost. It's the compounding you give up. And cars are just one category. Do the same analysis for watches, for clothes, for vacations, for dining, for all the various ways people signal status, and you're looking at multiple millions of dollars in foregone wealth over a lifetime. At BlackRock, we've done studies on wealth accumulation patterns. We've looked at households in the same income brackets and tried to understand why some accumulate significant wealth while others, despite similar earnings, have very little. And one of the strongest predictors is spending on visible consumption. The households that prioritize status spending have dramatically lower net worth than households that prioritize saving and investing, even when incomes are identical. I'm talking about people making $150,000 a year who have a net worth of $50,000 because they're spending on cars and clothes and vacations and maintaining an affluent lifestyle. Versus people making $150,000 a year who have a net worth of $800,000 because they drive modest cars, live in normal houses, and invest aggressively. Same income, 16 times difference in wealth, all because of spending choices. This is the essence of stealth wealth. It's the recognition that building wealth and displaying wealth are fundamentally incompatible goals for most people. Unless you're earning millions per year, unless you're in the top 1% of income, you have to choose. You can look rich or you can be rich. But you can't do both. And the people who understand this, who make the deliberate choice to look ordinary while investing heavily, they're the ones who actually build lasting financial security. Now, I want to address something. Some people hear this message and they think I'm advocating for extreme frugality, for deprivation, for living a joyless life counting every penny. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not telling you to never spend money on anything you enjoy. I'm not telling you to eat rice and beans every meal or wear rags or never go on vacation. What I'm saying is, be intentional about your spending. Understand the difference between consumption that genuinely improves your life and consumption that's driven by social signaling, and drastically reduce the latter. Because here's the thing about status spending, it doesn't actually make you happy. There's extensive research on this. The hedonic treadmill, the adaptation effect, whatever you call it, the phenomenon is the same. When you buy the luxury car or the designer bag or the expensive watch, you get a short-term happiness boost. But it fades quickly. Within weeks or months, you adapt. The new thing becomes normal. And you need another status purchase to get that same hit. It's an endless cycle. You're constantly chasing the feeling, constantly spending, and never arriving at lasting satisfaction. Compare that to spending on experiences that align with your values. Spending on time with family. Spending on hobbies you're passionate about. Spending on learning and growth. This kind of spending can actually improve your life quality in lasting ways. And often, it's much cheaper than status spending. A weekend camping trip with your kids costs $200 and creates memories that last forever. A weekend at a luxury resort costs $2,000 and is forgotten within months. One is wealth building compatible. The other is wealth destruction. This is why I emphasize that stealth wealth isn't about deprivation. It's about intentionality. It's about spending on what actually matters to you while ruthlessly cutting spending on things that don't matter beyond the social signal. And for most people, when they really examine their spending, they find that a huge portion is in the social signal category. Things they're buying not because they genuinely value them, but because they think they should, because their peers have them, because it's expected. I've seen this pattern over and over in my career. Young professionals who get their first high-paying job and immediately upgrade their entire lifestyle. They move to an expensive apartment in a trendy neighborhood. They buy a new car. They start shopping at expensive stores. They eat out constantly at fancy restaurants. They're suddenly spending 80% or 90% of their income maintaining this affluent image. And they justify it by saying they've earned it, they deserve it, they worked hard. But what they've actually done is locked themselves into a consumption pattern that makes wealth building nearly impossible. They're on a treadmill. They need to maintain the high income to sustain the lifestyle. They can't take career risks. They can't start a business. They can't take time off. They're trapped by their own consumption. And 10 or 15 years later, they wake up and realize they have almost nothing saved. They're living paycheck to paycheck despite making six figures. They have no financial security, no options, no freedom. Contrast that with someone who gets that same high-paying first job and consciously decides to maintain their college lifestyle for a few more years. They keep the modest apartment. They keep the old car. They cook at home. They invest the difference between what they earn and what they spend. After 5 years, they have $200,000 saved. After 10 years, they have $500,000. They have options. They have freedom. They can take career risks because they have a financial cushion. They can start a business. They can take time off. They're not trapped by consumption. This is the power of stealth wealth. It's not just about the money. It's about the freedom that money creates when you don't immediately convert it into lifestyle. It's about having choices. It's about not being controlled by your consumption habits or by social expectations. At BlackRock, we work with many ultra-high net worth individuals. People with $50 million, $100 million, sometimes much more. And I can tell you, the ones who built their wealth from scratch, as opposed to inheriting it, they almost universally practice some form of stealth wealth. They're not flashy. They're not ostentatious. They don't need to signal their wealth because they're secure in it. They know they're wealthy. They don't need external validation. The people who feel the need to constantly display their wealth, to constantly signal status, they're often the least secure. They're seeking validation. They're seeking respect through consumption. And ironically, the people they're trying to impress, the people who have actually built significant wealth, they see right through it. They know that real wealth is mostly invisible. It's in investment accounts and real estate portfolios and business ownership, not in cars and clothes and watches. This is one of the central ironies of status spending. You're spending money to impress people who are unimpressed by spending. The people worth impressing, the people who have actually built wealth, they're impressed by financial discipline, by investment acumen, by business success, not by consumption. And the people who are impressed by consumption, they're usually in the same trap you are. They're spending to signal status because they don't have real wealth. So you're playing a game where the only people keeping score are the ones who are losing. Now, let me talk about social media, because I think it's made the status spending problem exponentially worse. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, these platforms are essentially engines for status competition. Everyone is curating the highlights of their life. Everyone is posting their best moments, their nicest possessions, their most impressive experiences. And when you scroll through, you see this constant stream of people appearing to live amazing, affluent lives. But it's an illusion. It's a highly edited, highly selective presentation. What you don't see is the credit card debt funding those vacations. What you don't see is the car lease that's eating 30% of someone's income. What you don't see is the financial stress and anxiety behind the Instagram perfect facade. You see the signal. You don't see the reality. And this creates enormous psychological pressure to keep up, to match what you're seeing, to maintain your relative position in this perceived social hierarchy. People make terrible financial decisions because they feel like they need to keep up with what they see on social media. They're literally destroying their financial future to maintain an image for an audience of people they barely know and who aren't actually paying attention anyway. I've talked to young professionals who tell me they feel like they have to spend money on visible consumption because that's what's expected in their social circle, in their industry. If they don't have the right car or the right clothes or the right apartment, they worry they'll be judged, they'll be excluded, they won't be taken seriously professionally. And look, I understand that concern. Social signaling does matter in some contexts. First impressions do matter. But here's what I've learned over 50 years. The signaling that actually matters in professional contexts is competence signaling, not consumption signaling. When I'm evaluating someone professionally, I'm looking at their knowledge, their skills, their work ethic, their judgment, their character. I don't care what car they drive or what watch they wear. In fact, if someone shows up to a meeting in an absurdly expensive car or covered in luxury brands, my immediate thought is, this person has their priorities wrong. They're focused on appearance over substance. That's not someone I want to work with. The professionals I respect most, the ones who've built successful careers and substantial wealth, they're modest in their consumption. They don't need to peacock. They let their work speak for itself. And that's the sign of real confidence. Real success. If you need to constantly signal your status through consumption, that tells me you're insecure. You're compensating. And I'm wary of working with people who are compensating. This is why I believe stealth wealth isn't just a financial strategy. It's a psychological strategy. It's about building genuine self-confidence that comes from actual achievement and actual wealth building, rather than external validation that comes from consumption. When you know you have $500,000 in your investment accounts, when you know you're on track to be a millionaire, when you know you're building real financial security, you don't need to drive a luxury car. You don't need to wear a Rolex. You don't need to post vacation photos to prove anything to anyone. You're secure. You're confident. And that confidence comes from within, not from how others perceive you. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop caring about status signaling, when you embrace stealth wealth, you actually become more respected by the people worth being respected by. Because those people recognize what you're doing. They see the discipline. They see the long-term thinking. They see someone who has their priorities right. And they respect that far more than they'd respect any amount of visible consumption. So let me be clear about what we're talking about when we talk about stealth wealth. It's not about being cheap. It's not about denying yourself. It's not about living in poverty despite having money. It's about making conscious choices. It's about spending money on things that genuinely improve your life while avoiding spending money on things whose primary value is social signaling. It's about looking ordinary on purpose because you understand that ordinary appearance is completely uncorrelated with net worth. And it's about prioritizing wealth building over wealth display because you understand that real financial security, real freedom, comes from what you own, not from what you show. This is the mindset shift that creates millionaires. Not high income, not lucky investments, but disciplined consumption, intentional spending, long-term focus, and the willingness to look unremarkable while building something remarkable. In the next part, we're going to dive into the specific mechanics of how status spending destroys wealth. We're going to look at the psychology behind status competition. We're going to examine the actual costs of maintaining an affluent appearance. And we're going to talk about why the marketing industry, the advertising industry, the entire consumer economy is designed to keep you trapped in status spending. Because once you understand the system, once you see how it works, you can't unsee it. And that awareness is the first step toward opting out. All right, let's talk about the mechanics of how status spending actually destroys wealth. Because once you understand the system, once you see how it operates, you'll never look at consumption the same way. And more importantly, you'll understand why embracing stealth wealth isn't just a personal preference, it's a strategic defense against an economic system that's explicitly designed to extract money from you. I want to start with a concept that economists call positional goods. These are goods whose value comes primarily from their relative scarcity or exclusivity. A luxury watch, a designer handbag, a high-end car. The utility you get from these items isn't really about function. A $50 Casio tells time just as accurately as a $15,000 Rolex. A $500 leather bag holds your belongings just as well as a $5,000 Hermes bag. A $25,000 Honda Civic gets you from point A to point B just as reliably as a $100,000 BMW. The value of positional goods comes from the signal, from the fact that not everyone can afford them, from the exclusivity, from the status they confer. And here's the critical insight. Positional goods create a zero-sum game. If everyone could afford a Rolex, it wouldn't signal anything. The entire value proposition depends on most people not being able to afford it. So you're paying a massive premium for something whose entire purpose is to separate you from other people economically. Think about what this means. You're spending enormous amounts of money to participate in a competition where the goal is to demonstrate that you have more money than other people. But by spending that money on the demonstration, you're actually reducing your wealth. You're making yourself poorer in order to look richer. It's completely irrational from a wealth-building perspective. And yet millions of people do it every day. At BlackRock, we study consumer behavior. We look at spending patterns. We analyze what drives financial decisions. And what we've found is that status spending follows very predictable patterns based on income level and social reference groups. When someone gets a raise or a promotion, one of the first things they do is upgrade their consumption in visible categories. New car, nicer apartment, better clothes, fancier restaurants. They're immediately adjusting their lifestyle to signal their new economic position. But here's what's interesting. The amount spent on status goods increases much faster than income. Someone making $50,000 per year might spend $5,000 per year on status goods, 10% of income. Someone making $100,000 might spend $20,000 per year, 20% of income. Someone making $200,000 might spend $60,000 per year, 30% of income. The percentage increases as income increases. Why? Because at higher income levels, you're competing with higher income reference groups. You're trying to keep up with people who make more than you. So you spend disproportionately more on status just to maintain your relative position. This is the treadmill effect I mentioned earlier. You're running faster and faster just to stay in the same place relative to your peer group. And the only way to get off the treadmill is to consciously reject the competition. To decide that you're not playing the status game anymore. To embrace looking ordinary while building real wealth. Now, let me talk about the consumer marketing industrial complex, because understanding how this system works is crucial to defending against it. There's an entire multi-trillion-dollar industry whose sole purpose is to make you feel inadequate with what you have so you'll buy things you don't need with money you should be investing. And they're extraordinarily good at it. Think about how luxury brand advertising works. It doesn't emphasize function or quality. It emphasizes aspiration. It shows you beautiful people in exclusive settings living glamorous lives. And the message, explicit or implicit, is, if you buy this product, you'll be part of this world. You'll be part of this exclusive club. You'll be successful, attractive, desirable. The product is just the entry ticket. But it's a lie. Buying a Louis Vuitton bag doesn't make you sophisticated. Buying a BMW doesn't make you successful. Buying a Rolex doesn't make you powerful. You're the same person after the purchase as before. The only thing that's changed is your bank account is smaller. But the advertising is so effective, so psychologically manipulative, that people believe the lie. They believe the consumption will transform them somehow. And social media has amplified this by orders of magnitude. Now you're not just seeing advertising from brands. You're seeing your peers, your friends, your colleagues, all posting about their consumption. You're seeing influencers who are literally paid to display luxury products and make them seem aspirational. You're seeing a constant feed of people appearing to live these amazing, affluent lives. And your brain interprets that as the norm. You think everyone is living like this. You think you're falling behind if you're not keeping up. But remember, social media is a highlight reel. Nobody posts about their credit card debt. Nobody posts about their financial stress. Nobody posts about the fact that they can't afford to retire because they spent 30 years buying things to impress people online. You see the signal. You don't see the cost. I want to give you a specific example of how expensive maintaining an affluent appearance actually is. Let's model two people, both making $150,000 per year. Person A embraces status consumption. Person B practices stealth wealth. Let's break down their annual spending. Person A lives in an upscale apartment, $3,500 per month, $42,000 per year. Drives a luxury car with a $900 per month payment, $10,800 per year. Spends about $500 per month on designer clothes and accessories, $6,000 per year. Eats out at nice restaurants 4 to 5 times per week. Spends about $1,500 per month, $18,000 per year. Takes expensive vacations, $10,000 per year. Other miscellaneous status spending, another $10,000 per year. Total status-related spending, about $97,000 per year. Person B. Lives in a modest apartment in a good but not trendy neighborhood, $1,800 per month, $21,600 per year. Drives a reliable used car, paid off, just insurance and maintenance, $2,400 per year. Buys clothes at normal stores, $1,200 per year. Cooks at home mostly, eats out occasionally, $6,000 per year. Takes 1 or 2 modest vacations, $4,000 per year. Other spending, $8,000 per year. Total comparable spending, about $43,000 per year. The difference in spending is $54,000 per year. Now let's look at after-tax income. At $150,000 gross, after federal taxes, state taxes, FICA, you're taking home about $105,000. Person A is spending $97,000, leaving $8,000 to save and invest. That's a 5% savings rate. Person B is spending $43,000, leaving $62,000 to save and invest. That's a 41% savings rate. Over 30 years, assuming 7% investment returns, Person A accumulates about $800,000. Person B accumulates about $6 million. Same income, different consumption choices. The difference? $5.2 million. More than $5 million. That's the cost of status spending. That's what you give up when you prioritize looking wealthy over being wealthy. And here's what makes this even more stark. Person A, despite spending nearly $100,000 per year on lifestyle, probably doesn't feel wealthy. They're constantly stressed about money. They're living paycheck to paycheck despite a 6-figure income. They can't afford unexpected expenses. They have no emergency fund. They're not saving for retirement adequately. They're trapped by their consumption. Meanwhile, Person B, spending less than half as much, has complete financial security. They have options. They have freedom. They could retire early if they wanted. They could take career risks. They could start a business. They're not trapped. This is the fundamental paradox of status spending. The more you spend trying to appear wealthy, the less actual security and freedom you have. You're trading real wealth for the appearance of wealth. And that's a terrible trade. Now, let me talk about the psychological mechanisms that keep people trapped in status spending, because understanding these is crucial to breaking free. The first mechanism is social comparison. Humans are wired to compare themselves to others. It's an evolutionary adaptation. We evaluate our position relative to our tribe. And in modern society, consumption becomes a proxy for social position. So we're constantly looking at what others have and adjusting our consumption to match or exceed it. The problem is, you can always find someone who has more. No matter how much you consume, there's someone consuming more. So the comparison never ends favorably. You're always chasing. Always feeling inadequate, always needing to consume more to keep up. It's a race you can't win because the finish line keeps moving. The second mechanism is identity. People tie their self-worth to their consumption. They define themselves by what they own, what they wear, where they live, what they drive. Their possessions become extensions of their identity. So giving up status consumption feels like giving up part of who they are. It feels like diminishing themselves. This is why downgrading lifestyle is so psychologically difficult for most people. It's not just about the stuff. It's about their sense of self. The third mechanism is loss aversion. Once you've upgraded your lifestyle, going back feels like a loss. Even though logically you know you were fine before, emotionally it feels like deprivation. The fancy apartment, the luxury car, the expensive dinners, they become your new normal. Your expectations adjust. And then maintaining that level of consumption becomes necessary just to avoid feeling like you're losing something, even though that consumption is destroying your wealth. The fourth mechanism is present bias. Humans are wired to value immediate gratification over future benefit. The pleasure of buying something new is immediate. The benefit of investing that money is years or decades away. So even when people intellectually understand that they should be saving more and spending less, emotionally they struggle to do it. The pull of present consumption is just too strong. These psychological mechanisms are powerful. And they're universal. Everyone experiences them to some degree. The people who build wealth aren't immune to these forces. They just develop strategies to counteract them. They reframe their identity around wealth building rather than consumption. They find ways to get satisfaction from watching their investment accounts grow rather than from buying new things. They create habits and systems that make saving automatic and consumption harder. At BlackRock, when we work with clients on wealth building, we spend a lot of time on the behavioral side. Because we can create the perfect investment portfolio, we can optimize asset allocation, we can minimize taxes, but if the client can't control their spending, none of it matters. They'll just consume whatever they earn. They'll never build wealth. So we help them understand these psychological mechanisms. We help them create systems to defend against their own impulses. One framework we use is the concept of committed costs versus discretionary costs. Committed costs are the big fixed expenses that are hard to change in the short term: housing, transportation, insurance. Discretionary costs are the variable expenses you have more control over: food, entertainment, shopping, travel. The key insight is that your committed costs determine your financial trajectory. If your committed costs are 70% of your income, you can only save 30% maximum, and probably less once you account for discretionary spending. But if your committed costs are only 40% of your income, you have much more flexibility. This is why housing and transportation decisions are so critical. These are your biggest committed costs for most people. And they're also the most visible, the most status-laden. The person who buys the expensive house in the prestigious neighborhood and the luxury car, they've locked in high committed costs. They've constrained their savings capacity. They're stuck. The person who chooses the modest house and the reliable car, they've given themselves room to breathe financially. They've created the capacity to save and invest. And here's something most people don't think about. Committed costs have a ratchet effect. It's easy to increase them. It's incredibly hard to decrease them. Once you've moved into the expensive house, once you've bought the luxury car, downgrading feels like failure. It's socially awkward. It's psychologically painful. People will do almost anything to avoid having to downgrade. They'll take on debt. They'll drain their savings. They'll work jobs they hate. Anything to maintain the consumption level they've committed to. This is why the stealth wealth approach is so powerful. By keeping your committed costs low from the beginning, by never upgrading to the expensive house and the luxury car in the first place, you avoid the trap. You never get on the treadmill. You maintain flexibility. You keep your options open. And you maximize your savings capacity. Now, I want to address a common objection. People say, "Larry, I understand the math. I understand that status spending destroys wealth. But don't I deserve to enjoy my money? Don't I deserve to reward myself for working hard? Isn't the whole point of earning money to have a better lifestyle?" And look, I understand that perspective. I'm not advocating for living like a monk. I'm not saying you should never spend money on anything enjoyable. But here's what I'd ask you to consider. What actually makes you happy? What actually improves your quality of life? Is it the luxury car? Or is it the peace of mind that comes from having $500,000 in your investment account? Is it the designer clothes? Or is it the freedom to take a career risk because you have financial security? Is it the expensive vacation you post about on Instagram? Or is it the ability to retire 10 years early because you invested consistently? For most people, when they really examine what creates lasting happiness and life satisfaction, it's not consumption. It's security. It's freedom. It's autonomy. It's having choices. It's not being stressed about money. It's being able to help family members when they need it. It's being able to pursue work you find meaningful even if it doesn't pay the most. It's being able to retire comfortably. These are the things that actually matter. And all of them come from building wealth, not from displaying wealth. I've seen so many people reach their 50s or 60s and realize they made a terrible mistake. They spent decades buying things to impress people who weren't paying attention. They prioritized status over substance. They chased the appearance of success rather than actual financial security. And now they're facing retirement with inadequate savings. They can't retire when they want. They can't stop working. They're stuck, and they're filled with regret. Don't be that person. Don't sacrifice your future for present status. Don't trade decades of financial security for years of consumption. The temporary satisfaction of buying something new, of driving the nice car, of wearing the designer label, it fades. But the consequences of not building wealth, those are permanent. Those affect the rest of your life. At BlackRock, we talk about the concept of financial independence. It's the point where your investment income covers your living expenses and you no longer need to work for money. You work because you want to, not because you have to. And achieving financial independence is almost entirely a function of two things: your savings rate and your time horizon. The higher your savings rate, the faster you reach independence. The earlier you start, the more time compound interest has to work. Status spending destroys both of these. It reduces your savings rate. And by keeping you trapped in high consumption, it delays the point at which you can start saving seriously. So it's a double penalty. You're saving less and you're starting later. And the combined effect is that financial independence, if it happens at all, gets pushed decades into the future. This is why stealth wealth is so powerful. It maximizes your savings rate. It allows you to start early. It gives compound interest time to work. And the result is that you can achieve financial independence years or even decades earlier than you would otherwise. You get your freedom back. You get your time back. You get your choices back. And that's worth more than any luxury car or designer bag. Let me give you a specific comparison to make this concrete. Two people, both age 25, both earning $80,000 per year. Person A practices stealth wealth, saves 40% of after-tax income, invests consistently. Person B engages in status spending, saves 10% of after-tax income. Assuming 7% investment returns, Person A reaches financial independence at age 44. Person B reaches financial independence at age 63. That's a 19-year difference. Person A gets nearly 2 decades of freedom that Person B doesn't get. 19 years to pursue passion projects, to travel, to spend time with family, to do whatever they want because they're not constrained by the need to earn an income. That's what's at stake. That's what you're trading when you choose status spending over wealth building. You're not just trading money. You're trading time. You're trading freedom. You're trading years of your life. And for what? For the approval of people who don't actually matter. For the temporary satisfaction of owning things that will be outdated or worn out in a few years? For participation in a status competition where everyone is losing except the companies selling you stuff. It's a bad trade. It's always been a bad trade. But in the age of social media, in the age of constant comparison, in the age where status signaling has never been more visible or more relentless, it's a worse trade than ever. Because the pressure to consume is higher. The psychological manipulation is more sophisticated. The competition is more intense. And the cost of participating has never been higher. This is why embracing stealth wealth, consciously opting out of status competition, isn't just a financial strategy. It's a form of rebellion. It's refusing to play a rigged game. It's choosing substance over appearance. It's choosing freedom over validation. It's choosing your own values over society's expectations. And it's one of the most powerful decisions you can make for your financial future. All right, let's get practical. Because understanding why stealth wealth works is one thing, but actually implementing it, actually making the shift from status-oriented consumption to wealth-building consumption, that requires a systematic approach. And that's what I want to give you now. A framework for embracing stealth wealth that's actionable, sustainable, and psychologically manageable. The first step, and this is absolutely critical, is to audit your current spending with brutal honesty. Not what you think you spend. Not what you wish you spent. What you actually spend. And specifically, you need to identify what portion of your spending is driven by status signaling versus genuine value. This requires real introspection. Real honesty with yourself about your motivations. Here's how to do this practically. Take 3 months of spending data. Every transaction, every purchase. Put it all in a spreadsheet. Now, go through each expense and ask yourself a simple question. Would I spend this money on this thing if no one else would ever know about it? If there was no social signal, no status component, would I still make this purchase? Let me give you some examples of how to think about this. Your car. If no one would ever see you in it, if there was no brand recognition, no status signal, would you still buy the luxury car? Or would you buy the reliable Honda? Your watch. If no one would ever see it, would you spend $10,000 on a Rolex? Or would you spend $50 on a Casio that tells time just as accurately? Your apartment. If no one would ever visit, if the address didn't matter socially, would you pay premium prices for the trendy neighborhood? Or would you live somewhere more affordable? This thought experiment reveals your true preferences. It separates genuine value from status signaling. And for most people, when they do this honestly, they discover that a huge portion of their spending is status-driven. Maybe 30%, 40%, sometimes 50% or more of their expenditures are primarily about signaling rather than genuine utility. That's the money that's available for reallocation. That's the money that could be invested instead. At BlackRock, when we work with clients on financial planning, this is often the most revealing exercise. People think they need their current lifestyle. They think all their spending is essential or genuinely valuable to them. But when they really examine it, when they separate the status component from the utility component, They realized they could cut their spending by 30% or 40% without any reduction in actual quality of life. In fact, many report that their quality of life improves because they're no longer stressed about money and they're not trapped by consumption. Now, once you've identified your status spending, the second step is to create a target spending level based on your values rather than your income. This is crucial. Most people scale their spending to their income. If they make $100,000, they spend $90,000. If they make $150,000, they spend $135,000. Their spending is a function of what they earn, not what they need or what they value. This is the trap. Instead, you need to determine your ideal spending level independent of your income. Start by defining your values. What actually matters to you? What brings you genuine satisfaction? What kind of life do you want to live? Not what kind of life you think you should want or what kind of life others expect you to have. What do you actually want? For some people, travel is genuinely important. They get real value from experiencing new places and cultures. For others, it's completely unimportant. They're happy staying local. For some people, having a nice home is important because they spend a lot of time there. For others, home is just a place to sleep and they'd rather be out doing things. For some people, hobbies that require equipment are important. Photography, cycling, woodworking, whatever. For others, their interests are low cost. The point is, your spending should reflect your actual values, not a generic template of what an affluent lifestyle looks like. And when you build your budget from your values up rather than from your income down, you often find that you need much less than you thought. Many people discover they can live very well on 50% or 60% of their income when they stop spending on things that don't actually matter to them. This is the foundation of stealth wealth. Living well below your means not through deprivation, but through intentionality. Spending on what matters, not spending on what doesn't. And investing the difference aggressively. The third step is to make stealth wealth your default. This requires restructuring your financial systems to make saving automatic and spending require effort. At BlackRock, we call this building friction. You want friction between you and spending, especially discretionary spending. You want no friction between you and saving. Here's how to implement this. Set up automatic transfers from your checking account to your investment accounts on the day you get paid. Before you see the money, before you can spend it, it's gone. It's invested. You're paying yourself first, and the amount you're transferring should be aggressive. If your analysis showed you could live on 60% of your income, transfer 40% automatically to investments. For your spending, use one checking account and one credit card. All discretionary spending goes through the credit card. And here's the key. You check the balance regularly. You make it visible. You create awareness of what you're spending. This adds friction. Every purchase requires a conscious decision. You can't just mindlessly swipe. You have to think about whether this aligns with your values, whether it's status spending or genuine value. Another powerful technique is the 48-hour rule. For any discretionary purchase over a certain amount, maybe $100 or $200, you wait 48 hours before buying. You put the item in your cart. You close the browser. You wait. If after 48 hours you still want it, you still think it's a good use of money, fine. Buy it. But you'll be amazed how often the desire fades. How often you realize you were just experiencing an impulse driven by advertising or social comparison or boredom. The 48-hour rule eliminates probably 50% to 70% of impulse purchases. That's huge money over time. The fourth step is to reframe your relationship with money and possessions. This is psychological work, but it's essential. Instead of seeing your investment account balance as money you're depriving yourself of spending, see it as freedom you're accumulating. Every dollar invested is a piece of your future freedom. It's buying back your time. It's buying your choices. It's buying your independence from having to work for money. I know people who literally name their investment accounts. They call it their freedom fund or their FU money or their independence account. This linguistic reframing makes the money feel different. It's not money you could spend but aren't. It's freedom you're building. And that reframe makes it psychologically easier to not spend. Similarly, reframe possessions. Instead of seeing the luxury car or the designer bag as something desirable, see it as an obstacle to freedom. See it as a claim on your future earnings. See it as a trap. When you're tempted to make a status purchase, calculate how much freedom you're giving up. How much longer you'll have to work to earn that money back. How many days or weeks of your life that purchase will cost. Let me give you a specific example. You're considering a $60,000 luxury car instead of a $25,000 reliable car. That's $35,000 difference. At your after-tax income, you earn maybe $50 per hour effectively. That $35,000 represents 700 hours of work. That's 87.5 workdays. That's more than 4 months of your life. Are you really willing to trade 4 months of your life for the status signal of a luxury car? When you frame it that way, the decision becomes much clearer. This is the mental shift that makes stealth wealth sustainable. You're not depriving yourself. You're choosing freedom over consumption. You're choosing time over stuff. You're choosing real wealth over the appearance of wealth. And that choice becomes easier when you frame it correctly. The fifth step is to find your stealth wealth community. Because one of the hardest parts of embracing stealth wealth is the social isolation. If all your friends are spending heavily on status, if your social circle revolves around consumption, if everyone around you is competing for status, it's extremely hard to opt out. The social pressure is immense. This is why you need to actively seek out people who share your values. People who are building wealth rather than displaying it. People who drive modest cars and live in normal houses and wear normal clothes but have substantial investment portfolios. These people exist. In fact, they're the majority of actual millionaires. They're just less visible because they're not signaling. Where do you find them? Fire communities online, local investment clubs, certain professional organizations, through shared interests that are low cost like hiking or reading, through volunteer work, through religious or philosophical communities that emphasize values over materialism. The specific venue doesn't matter. What matters is finding people who won't judge you for driving a Honda, who won't care that you don't have designer clothes, who respect financial discipline more than conspicuous consumption. When you have this community, when you have people who reinforce your values rather than undermine them, the social pressure disappears. In fact, it reverses. You feel proud of your modest consumption. You feel good about your growing investment accounts. You get validation for the right behaviors rather than the wrong ones. At BlackRock, I've seen this pattern repeatedly. The people who successfully build wealth despite high consumption opportunities, they almost always have a reference group that values wealth building. They have friends or family members who are also focused on financial independence. They have role models who've achieved it. They have people who understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And that social reinforcement makes all the difference. Now, let me address specific spending categories and how to approach them from a stealth wealth perspective. Let's start with housing, because it's the biggest expense for most people. The stealth wealth approach is simple. Live in a house that's comfortable but not impressive. Don't buy the most house you can afford. Don't stretch for the prestigious neighborhood. Don't treat your home as a status symbol. Instead, find a home in a good but not elite neighborhood. Make sure it's safe. Make sure the schools are decent if you have kids. Make sure it's convenient for your life. But don't pay premium prices for prestige. The difference between a good neighborhood and an elite neighborhood can be $200,000 or $300,000 or more. That's money that should be invested, not spent on marginal neighborhood status. And here's a radical idea. Consider staying in a smaller home longer than your income would traditionally dictate. Just because you can afford a 3,000 square foot house doesn't mean you need one. Maybe 1,500 square feet is actually enough. Maybe you don't need the spare bedrooms that sit empty most of the time. Maybe you don't need the formal dining room you use twice a year. Less space means less cost, less maintenance, less stuff to fill it with, and more money to invest. For cars, the stealth wealth approach is even simpler. Buy reliable, efficient cars and drive them into the ground. A well-maintained Toyota or Honda will easily last 200,000 miles, 15 years or more. Buy them used, after the steepest depreciation, and keep them until they're no longer reliable. The total cost of ownership is a fraction of buying new luxury cars every few years. And here's the thing. A 10-year-old Camry is not a sacrifice. It's a comfortable, reliable, safe car. It gets you where you need to go. It just doesn't signal status. And that's exactly the point. You're not depriving yourself of transportation. You're just not paying premium prices for a status signal. For clothes, the stealth wealth approach is to buy quality basics and wear them for years. You don't need designer labels. You don't need logo-covered clothing. You need well-fitting, durable, classic styles in neutral colors. A $40 button-down shirt from a normal store that fits well and lasts 5 years is a better investment than a $400 designer shirt that you wear to signal status. And here's what wealthy people know. Truly elegant, sophisticated style isn't about logos and brands. It's about fit, quality, and classics. The people with real style, real elegance, they're often wearing simple, understated clothing. No logos, no obvious signals, Just good clothes that fit well and look professional. That's stealth wealth dressing. For dining and entertainment, the stealth wealth approach is to cook at home most of the time and save restaurant dining for occasions that matter. Going out to expensive restaurants constantly is pure status spending for most people. The food at home can be just as good or better. The experience is often more enjoyable because you're relaxed. And the cost is a fraction. Save the restaurant budget for times when it's genuinely about the experience, not the signal. Celebrating an anniversary. Catching up with an old friend who's visiting. Trying a cuisine you can't make at home. These are legitimate uses. But going out 4 or 5 nights a week because you think that's what successful people do. That's status spending. That's burning money you should be investing. For vacations, the stealth wealth approach is to focus on experiences rather than luxury. You don't need 5-star hotels and first-class flights to have an amazing trip. Some of the best travel experiences are budget accommodations, local food, slow travel where you really get to know a place. The luxury resort vacation that costs $10,000 is often less memorable than the adventure travel that costs $2,000. And here's a secret that wealthy people know. Travel doesn't need to be expensive to be enriching. National parks, road trips, camping, visiting friends in different cities, exploring your own region. These can all be incredibly rewarding and cost almost nothing. You're trading the Instagram-worthy status signal for actual experiences and memories. And the latter are more valuable. Now, I want to talk about how to handle social situations where your stealth wealth might be visible. Because this is a real challenge. If your friends want to go to an expensive restaurant and you suggest somewhere more affordable, there can be social friction. If your colleagues all drive luxury cars and you show up in a Honda, there might be comments. If your family expects certain gifts or certain experiences and you're no longer spending at that level, there can be tension. Here's how I recommend handling this. Be honest but not preachy. You don't need to hide that you're being intentional about money. You can say you're focused on building savings. You can say you're working toward financial independence. You can say you're being more deliberate about spending. Most people will respect that. They might even be envious that you have the discipline they lack. What you shouldn't do is criticize others for their choices. Don't become the person who lectures everyone about their spending. Don't judge people who are still in the status competition. They're on their own journey. You're on yours. Just live your values quietly and let your results speak for themselves. And here's what often happens. When people see you consistently making different choices, consistently prioritizing saving over spending, consistently building wealth while they're treading water, some of them start asking questions. They start getting curious. They start wondering if maybe they should be doing something different. You become a model without even trying. Your quiet example is more powerful than any lecture. At BlackRock, we've seen this pattern in corporate culture. When senior people consistently demonstrate financial discipline, when they're not trying to impress anyone with consumption, it creates a different culture. It makes it acceptable to be frugal. It makes it okay to not participate in status competition. And that cultural shift, even in small ways, can help a lot of people make better financial decisions. Let me also address the question of when status spending might actually be justified. Because I don't think it's never justified. I think there are specific contexts where some level of status signaling is professionally necessary. If you're in sales and meeting with high net worth clients, showing up in a beat-up car might undermine your credibility. If you're in a client-facing role in certain industries, some level of polished presentation might be necessary for success. But even in these cases, the key is to be strategic and minimal. Buy one good suit, not 10. Buy one decent watch, not a collection. Drive a presentable car, not a supercar. Do the minimum necessary to meet professional requirements, and not $1 more. Don't let professional necessities become an excuse for broader status spending in your personal life. And honestly, in most professions, the status requirements are much lower than people think. I've been at the highest levels of finance for decades, and I can tell you that the most successful people, the real wealth builders, they're not the flashiest. They're competent, they're professional, they're thoughtful, and that's what matters. The car you drive or the watch you wear, it's almost irrelevant to professional success. It's a story we tell ourselves to justify consumption. Now, let me talk about the compounding effect of stealth wealth over a full career. Because the numbers are staggering when you run them out. Let's model 2 people over a 40-year career, both starting at age 25 earning $60,000, both receiving 3% annual raises, both investing with 7% real returns. Person A practices stealth wealth, saves 35% of after-tax income throughout their career. By age 65, they have approximately $3.8 million in investments, generating about $152,000 per year in sustainable withdrawals at a 4% rate. They can retire comfortably. They have financial security. They have options. Person B engages in status spending, saves 10% of after-tax income throughout their career. By age 65, they have approximately $1.1 million in investments, generating about $44,000 per year in sustainable withdrawals. They probably can't retire fully. They'll need to keep working or dramatically reduce their lifestyle. They have limited options. The difference? $2.7 million in wealth, $108,000 per year in retirement income. The ability to retire versus having to keep working. All from spending choices. Same income trajectory. Radically different outcomes. And here's what makes this even more powerful. Person A probably lived just as well as person B for most of their lives. They weren't deprived. They just weren't consuming for status. They had good homes, reliable cars, nice experiences. They just weren't spending to impress people. And the result is that they have freedom person B will never have. This is what stealth wealth creates. Not deprivation during your working years and wealth in retirement, but reasonable comfort during your working years and extraordinary wealth and freedom in retirement. You're not sacrificing your present for your future. You're just being intentional about what you spend on in the present so that your future is secure. Let me close with this. I started this conversation by talking about the paradox. The more you display wealth, the less you build it. And I hope by now this isn't just a philosophical statement. I hope it's a practical reality you can see clearly. Status spending and wealth building are fundamentally incompatible for most people at most income levels. You have to choose. And if you choose wealth building, if you choose stealth wealth, if you choose substance over appearance, here's what you get. Financial security that grows every year. Investment accounts that compound. Options that expand rather than contract. Freedom that increases rather than decreases. The ability to retire when you want rather than when you have to. The ability to help family members when they need it. The ability to take career risks because you have a cushion. The ability to pursue work you find meaningful even if it doesn't pay the most. These are the real rewards of stealth wealth. Not looking rich, being free, and freedom. Genuine economic freedom where you're not controlled by the need to earn money, where you have real choices about how to spend your time. That's worth infinitely more than any luxury car or designer bag or expensive vacation. At BlackRock, we've helped millions of people build wealth over the past 4 decades. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, the people who succeed, the people who actually build substantial net worth and achieve financial independence, they're not the ones spending heavily on status. They're the ones practicing some version of stealth wealth. They're living modestly relative to their income. They're investing aggressively. They're patient. They're disciplined. And they're focused on building real wealth rather than the appearance of wealth. You can do the same. You can make this choice. You can opt out of status competition. You can embrace stealth wealth. You can prioritize substance over appearance. And when you do, when you commit to this path, you'll discover something remarkable. You don't miss the status spending. You don't feel deprived. What you feel instead is relief. Relief from the pressure to keep up. Relief from the financial stress. Relief from the consumption treadmill. And you feel something else. Pride. Pride in your growing investment accounts. Pride in your discipline. Pride in your long-term thinking. Pride in the fact that you're building something real, something substantial, something that will give you and your family genuine security and freedom. That pride, that satisfaction, it's deeper and more lasting than the temporary hit you get from any status purchase. So here's my challenge to you. Audit your spending. Identify the status component. Calculate what you're giving up by engaging in status competition. Model what your financial life could look like if you embraced stealth wealth. See the numbers. Make it concrete. And then make a choice. Not based on what others expect. Not based on what advertising tells you. Not based on what you see on social media. But based on your own values and your own long-term interests. Choose wealth over wealth display. Choose freedom over status. Choose substance over appearance. Choose the path that leads to actual financial security rather than the illusion of affluence. Because in the end, looking rich and being rich are completely different things. And only one of them actually matters. Be the millionaire next door. Drive the Toyota. Wear the normal clothes. Live in the modest house. And build the investment portfolio that gives you real wealth, real security, and real freedom. That's stealth wealth. That's the strategy that works. And that's the choice that could be worth 7 figures to you over your lifetime.